Well, let's get into this text. We'll see where we go, huh?
Yeah.
So this is Genesis chapter 33, verse 18, which is where we pick up from our last conversation about 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. So this is after departing from Esau and all of that, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Paddan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the plot of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. So this is an interesting word, God of gods of Israel. So it's just a way of saying this is the God of Israel. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the region. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the region, saw her, he seized her and lay with her by force. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl to be my wife." Now Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his cattle in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him, just as the sons of Jacob came in from the field. When they heard of it, the men were indignant and very angry, because he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The heart of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Make marriages with us, give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall live with us, and the land shall be open to you. Live and trade in it, and get property in it." Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor with you, and whatever you say to me I will give. Put the marriage present and gift as high as you like, and I'll give whatever you ask me. Only give me the girl to be my wife." The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you, that you will become as we are, and every male among you be circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and will live among you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone." Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young men did not delay to do the thing, because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all of his family. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, "These people are friendly with us. Let them live in the land and trade in it, for the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will they agree to live among us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their animals be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they'll live among us." And all who went out of the city gate heeded Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. So we'll stop there, because that's a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Then we can pick up on the third day. So Jacob's entrance back into this land, he does what Abraham did, huh? He purchases land. So that's another indication he's in enemy territory, but Jacob is a stand-up guy. But in purchasing this land, his wealth is revealed, right? I mean, obviously they see all the flocks and herds and everything like that. And that's really behind this story, right? The greed of the Shechemites. Do you think so? You think I'm overstating?
Well, I'm not sure that's immediately what we see, but one thing that's confusing to me is the question of how many daughters does Jacob have, because the father says, we'll give your daughters to our sons and such like that. So it's a little confusing.
Yeah, and we had mentioned this a few weeks ago, and I mentioned it, I think, a lot, is that this is a compressed history. So we're only given the information that is necessary. So I had mentioned back when they mentioned that Dinah was born to them, that is probably because she was going to serve a significant purpose. She was going to figure into the narrative, but we should not assume that there were not other girls born.
Yeah.
And so here that's confirmed. Obviously, Jacob has daughters, but we're only told of the one that comes into the narrative. And that's,
Right.
I mean, there's only so much space in these scrolls. You're not going to put every detail,
Right.
you know?
Right. Yeah. It's just a interesting
Yeah.
thought, I'm sure quite a few people are like, what's
Yeah,
going
because there
on here?
has to be more than Dinah, or else what would be the logic of having all of the men circumcised if there's only one woman,
Right.
right?
And then there
Wouldn't
was
make any
one
sense.
confusing part where they talked about Shechem and her father. I mean, it was a weird kind of
Yeah,
way
I
of,
stopped a few times. The New Revised Standard Version isn't known for having great grammar. If you really want beautiful grammar that's smooth, you got to go to the NIV for that. But so I stumbled a couple times. I'm like, what are they saying here? But yeah, the hers and the hymns, we'll get it all squared away. I think it's all
yeah,
accurate. It's
yeah,
a little bit awkward sometimes in how they say it. And I
a
should
little
have looked
bizarre.
up how to pronounce his name, because his name is Hamor with a guttural. So I should have realized that. And Shechem is also a guttural. It's a kaf, but they're different letters. So anyway.
Well, it's interesting that the city's named the same name. So, and
Yeah,
then they call
obviously
him a
this
prince.
isn't actually named Shechem at this time, and you have to realize that when you read these scriptures, the Moses and then some of the later editors, they update the place names so you know where they are. We already saw that with Bethel and Luz. It was called Bethel before it was called Luz, but it wasn't named Bethel till after it was named Luz. So there was some confusion there. And Shechem is the same. Obviously, this city is named after this man, so it's not named that yet. But we're not given what the ancient name was. Maybe Moses didn't know. So it's called Shechem throughout. It's called Shechem when Abraham comes there, but it's unlikely that that was actually its name at that time. We just don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be a little confusing. That's all I was trying to highlight.
Yeah, agreed. I'm glad you pointed out. Yeah, so, Dinah goes out to interact with the women. She may be the oldest daughter. I don't know. I don't know what the logic was that she's the one who goes out. Maybe she just did. And Hamor sees her, and he forces her to lay with him. Now, we don't know the laws of the Shechem, what we might call the Shechemites, which is a little weird. These are probably Hittites, at least if it's still the same group that we saw interaction with earlier in the story. They're probably of Hittite origin anyway. And we don't know the laws. But later in the law of Moses, this is a way to force marriage. As long as it's not done in a city. I mean, if it's done in a city and she doesn't cry out in the law of Moses, then she has to marry him. If it's done out in the country and there's no one to hear her scream, she gets the benefit of the doubt and she doesn't have to marry. It's an interesting set of laws for Moses later. And I don't know if we're supposed to believe that the same thing is in play here, but the impression I get is that Shechem thought this was a way to force this marriage. And we don't know much about the culture, so we can only guess. But I think the narrative plays that out. I think the narrative indicates that he seems to think this is a way to make her marry him. And something about his culture there. So it is a rape, and it's abominable. And of course, the sons of Jacob think of it as abominable immediately. But we should probably be aware that the story seems to be indicating that this is the way Hamor thought he could force a marriage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about even in European history, they would marry between states and try to for control. And so I can see how, hey, this is, because it does say in the text that, if we marry with all these people, then won't all their stuff be ours?
Right.
So
That's why I was saying at the beginning, I sense some greediness here. Like Shechem later, now he loves her. This is not chesed. It's the word ahav, which we talked about. He prefers her. And obviously he was desirous of her, even beyond that, because he forced her to lay with him. but it's unclear what his motives are. Clearly his motives are marriage, but we're not told why he preferred her, why he loved her. Now, we read that as 21st century people, and we think it's because it was like love at first sight for him, even though it wasn't for her, or it was just lust or something. But his later conversation with the men he may have lusted after her father's wealth as much as after her.
You're right.
He may have been trying to bond these two families in a way that he thought would work. It turns out terribly bad for him. It doesn't work out as he expected. But, remember, women are, especially we're told several times that he is a royalty of sorts in this city. And for royalty, marriage is about wealth and the accumulation of wealth and the solidification of power much more frequently than it is about what we would call love. And it seems like that's beneath this, but we are guessing. But it seems like Shechem's motives are not quite, Prince Charming. And we know that because of how he goes about it. But this behavior actually repeats itself in Israel some years later in the household of David.
Yeah, and so it is. Do you have any? Let me ask you a question there. Any idea of how old you think she might be? I mean, because in the languaging, because it just says daughter of Leah, born to Jacob, went to visit the women in the region. So you would think that she would be maybe old enough to be able to, but then in some ways they use words like girl, love the girl. So
I don't think it's really. So the word that they're using for girl there, na'ara, probably is meant to indicate that she's unmarried.
So it's like,
but she's obviously of marriageable age, which in the ancient world could scare people, because that was only 13 or 14 years old. But I'd say we're safe to say she's older than 13 or 14, like she's marriageable age. And she's clearly not married, which I think is why na'ara is used of her. She's a young woman. But other than that, I don't know. We have no idea how old she was. By the time of Jesus, which is like a long time later, we're talking thousands of years now, most women were married in their teens, between the age of 14 and like 16 or 17. It would be pretty unusual for it to go longer than that, whereas men were generally married by the time they were 19 or 20. So maybe she's in that teenage year, but there's no way to know because they were traveling. They lived in Haran. Maybe all these guys are older. We know that Jacob didn't get married till he was 37, 40, somewhere around there, remember? Yeah. So who knows? Older than 14, I would say, and called a girl because she had not yet married. Yeah, that's my best guess.
Yeah, so I mean, because it stirs a little bit of righteous anger, if some people might have, think taking advantage of. But she did go to the city. It sounds like she went to that place on her own or alone at least. So.
And this is part of this story, right? Because this is what Abraham feared would happen to Sarah. It's what Isaac feared would happen to Rebekah. That somebody would see their spouse and want them and do something evil to get them. And that was the rationale Abraham used for lying. It was the rationale Isaac used for lying. And now we see their fear realized with Dinah. So obviously this is part of this culture. This was a real risk. And it is, so it's it's abominable because it's a personal attack. And it's also an attack on Israel because what should have happened is Hamor or his son should have met with Jacob and gone through the proper procedure of asking if this marriage was suitable and, all the things we saw Jacob do with Laban and negotiate and all the things we saw Abraham's servant do with, the father. And so he has taken her without permission. So it's a personal attack on Dinah, and it's a communal attack on Jacob. It undercuts his authority. And his sons, if you hope that somebody would be angry, well, you get your hope. They are angry.
Right.
They do not take this as okay.
So do you think this was like, hey, why don't you come to my house? Or was it like a physical kidnapping, do you think?
It's so the narration is so compressed here. There's no way to know how it happened. He could have invited her home. It's unlikely it was done in a real public setting, so there's some change of scenery, but we're not told. Obviously, that's not important.
What we read so far, there isn't one word said from her perspective.
No, and that's another one of these things. We should just admit again that women do not quite get the voice that they don't at all get the voice that they will later. In Genesis, it's often, if you're just reading the narrative, you might say it's a fallout from the curse that falls on women after the Garden of Eden. There's a greatly diminished voice after Eve in Genesis. But in the best of circumstances, like with Abraham and Sarah, maybe certainly with Isaac and Rebekah, there's more camaraderie. They're a little closer to the original intention of God that they would be partners, an Ezer Kenegdo. When you do see a righteous couple, you see that. But in most cases, exactly what God said would happen between men and women do. And boy, is the curse of Eden seen here, right? In all of its gory details, a man who completely dominates a woman. And I don't think that's meant to be seen as good or fine. I think if we're really reading Genesis carefully, we see that that is a consequence of the fall. I think we would rather look to the couples that are more approximating Eden than something like this, which is just living into the fall with utter abandon. Your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. We see that put, when you get to the pagans, you see that put to extremes, and that happens here. And Dinah, again, we don't get to hear. She has no voice in the story. In this culture at this time, she depends on her father and her brothers to vindicate her honor. Now, what do you think about this, Minister Joe? Because it bothered me when I read it. That's why I mention it. Jacob heard that she had been raped, but he didn't say anything until his sons came home. I think that's the part of the story that bothers me the most. He didn't say anything to her.
Well, say anything to who? Because it sounds to me like he kept her captive, like she was still in the house.
Maybe that's true, and Jacob just didn't confront Nahor. I keep confusing with Rebecca's father, Nahor, with Hamor.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it means. But I can't, it's because I'm hearing later stories in this. You remember when in the story of David, when his son rapes his daughter, they're from two different mothers, but David is both of their parents. When Tamar is raped, David doesn't say anything then. Do you remember?
I believe
and
so.
I guess what's striking me here is Jacob never says anything. He leaves it to his sons. We'll see in the story. They take up the offense and they go do something, but Jacob doesn't really say anything. He's very passive. And I guess that bothers me. It bothered me with David, and it's easier to see as negative with David because David's presented at that point. That this is a consequence of his own wickedness, that this is even happening in his household. But here I don't know how to read Jacob, and I've been reading Jacob very generously throughout the story. This one bothers me.
Yeah, well, I think it rightly should bother you because you're a father and you have children. But I think what could be something here. I don't think he's not addressing it. I'm trying to think of what maybe transpired, how he would have found this out, and the kind of delay aspect and why that's so important. I think probably Jacob is legitimately afraid of
Yeah, I
of
agree with you. And I think you're right. As I'm looking at it, I agree with you. She's probably still with Shechem. And
yeah.
probably what is meant here is that Jacob heard what had happened because she hasn't come back. And he doesn't say anything. But I'm still going to be hard on Jacob here because also we don't see him directing his sons at all. We don't see the conversation that he has with them. And they seem to act on their own accord without much dialogue with him. And then he reprimands them later for what they do. So I also don't see Jacob as leading his family here. And I think that bothers me. And that's the silence that really irritates me here. Because this is the moment for Jacob to step up. He's the one with the relationship with the Lord. He's the one with the promises. He's been leading them back to Canaan. And then this happens. This is the moment for him, I would think, to step up and guide his sons. But he doesn't do that. I'm going to be hard on him for not doing that because I think this might have gone differently had he stepped up.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably true. When I say definitely, I mean definitely. That's a point, and then probably true means he could have steered them a little more. Am I recalling properly though? Did Reuben do what he did with Bilhah, or was it Bilhah or Zipporah before or after this?
That's a good question. Let me look it up while you're talking. I think that has already happened, but I'm not remembering. So I'll find out here.
I'm thinking that Jacob it's showing the unraveling of the continuity of his sons, I think, and they're I think maybe potentially while you're looking that up, just
it's not happened yet. It's going to happen in the next chapter.
Okay,
it's in 35.
So it's hard for me because I'm like a little bit all over the place as far as like some of my studies.
Well, I didn't know either, but that's yet to come. But Reuben is going to go in and sleep with his father's concubine. Yeah.
So there seems I think this is a part of a unraveling of showing the nature of revenge, the jealousy, the sort of the things of following after Cain, and let's be honest, these boys aren't boys anymore. I don't, and yet probably if they were older, they might have thought differently, but they might be young enough that there's enough of desire of wanting for revenge.
This story, I agree with you. It's all over this, especially Cain. Bringing up Cain is good because this is a type of covetousness that's at the base of this. I think with Shechem, he's desiring his neighbor's daughter, and it leads him to do evil. And he's also greedy for their possessions. So we can see in this story that the native inhabitants of the land are very driven by Cain-like ideologies, by jealousy, covetousness, greed, and he is also a privileged person, right? He's a prince, so perhaps he is used to getting what he wants and doesn't feel he needs to ask. And that reminds me later of King Ahab and the way he wanted Naboth. You remember the story, his vineyard.
Yeah, the vineyard.
He thought he should have it, and Naboth said no, and his wife conspired to do some evil to get it for him. It's very similar to this. It's funny when God, well, not funny, haha, but when God sends the Israelites into the land to wipe out these nations, it's to get rid of these ideologies. And funny enough, Israel eventually just does the same things, and that's the story of Judges, Joshua, Judges, and 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. You'll see all the things God judged in the people of Canaan manifest themselves in the people of Israel over time. But here I agree with you. Covetousness is all over this. Greed is all over this. And then on the other side, vindictiveness, vengeance, and bloodlust is all over this as well. So it's a story that, read in light of Jesus, reveals the total depravity at this time of not just of the people of the land, but even of Jacob's family. And poor Dinah at this point, and I'll say poor Dinah is caught in the middle of the whole thing.
Right. So there seems to me the potential of the second half of the Decalogue.
Yeah.
All encompassed in one.
Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not covet, right? It's all there. Yeah, I mean, this is the world as it presents itself when God first calls Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the world, funny enough, it hasn't changed that much. There are still people who, when they see someone they want, they will not let them say no. They pursue them just as Shechem did, and if they have enough power, they get what they want. Those people are still in the world. There are still people who their only crime is being desirous to somebody that they don't want.
Mm-hmm.
And they're punished for that. It's completely unjust. And then once those sins are done, there are people who will do just as much evil in order to punish evil people for the evil they do.
Yep. You got to give some Hamar. You got to give him some credit for trying to negotiate, though. And are you disappointed with Jacob's ability to negotiate with him? I mean, you would think there might have been some kind of ransom note or something, and said, "Well, hey, you know what? Why are you doing this to me? I purchased land from you guys."
Well, it seems to me that Jacob is doing no negotiating. Am I wrong about this? So I'm looking at the story, and what I see is that Jacob doesn't say anything until his sons come in. And it looks in verse 8 to me like Hamor is speaking to the sons of Jacob. And it's his sons that respond with this idea. I don't see Jacob doing anything. And that's what I'm befuddled by it, Minister Joe, because up until this point, Jacob has been very involved in everything. I don't know what to make sense of this. And I'm trying to figure out in my own spirit what Moses is saying here about Jacob. Like, why is he make sure we remember the story this way?
Is the first verse a hint, though?
Do you think it's because it's Leah's daughter? He did put them first with Esau, remember? Did he send Dinah in here to check these people out?
Could be.
I don't know. You may be right.
Think she's the set.
She's the sacrificial lamb for him?
Or what I used to call the bird dog.
Yeah.
You send the dog in, and it flushes out the birds, and
or the canary in the coal mine.
I mean, I hate to think of a life that way.
I know. Well, because we wouldn't. It's abominable. This is going to be a black mark on Jacob's character for me. Of course, we know he's living in this culture, and we've already seen this. But I want to say we've already seen this in his family twice, where Abraham protected himself at Sarah's expense, and Isaac protected himself at Rebekah's expense. Maybe Jacob's protecting himself at Dinah's expense.
Well, that's the one thought. The other thought is that Leah sent her. Maybe
Leah did. Yeah, but there is a reason. You're being a good reader. There's a reason that this thing begins by telling us whose daughter Dinah was, because it may explain Jacob's response.
Well, not only that, but sometimes children, we know from being parents, sometimes children will manipulate or force things in order for their parents to react. And it's easy to read that Jacob's passive, but if Leah is like Rachel with the household gods, in trying to one up Rachel potentially with, hey, let's get in good with the locals. Well, maybe we can do some maneuvering. Maybe things will go a little better. Because it doesn't give the reason why. It says that she went there to talk to the women of the town. maybe she was the beginning of the negotiations, and Leah could say, "Hey, our daughter went and sat and rode, and with I doubt she went there to give herself to this
Right.
fellow.
No, I don't think so either. But, I guess what we're dancing around is that the story here in Genesis has already demonstrated to us that the men of this family knew it was not safe to send women into these places by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't even safe to accompany those women if they were desirous, if you were their husbands.
Mm-hmm.
So it begs the question, why was Dinah not accompanied? If Abraham knew this and Isaac knew this, why does Jacob allow her to go in by herself? And that is a question that looms over this, because had she been accompanied by one of her brothers, it would have gone differently.
Yep. Somebody would have, yeah, it would have gone differently for sure. Oh,
So,
yeah,
I
we
mean,
assume.
Moses is telling us something here, and I can't, now that you've pointed it out, I can't unsee it. The text is making overt that Dinah is Leah's daughter.
I mean, the common reader would just read over that.
Yeah. But of course, we get into these details and we're so upset by them, you have to go back and look for answers.
It's totally emotional. I mean, the first response is, because the title or the top of it, that's not really the text, but it says the rape of Dinah, and the text actually says he forced himself on her.
Yep.
Seized her and forced himself on her. So that could have some very, very different visual activities, and to greater or lesser degree.
Yep.
And yet the violation is the violation anyways. So it's not to be ignored, because it implies an unwelcomed.
Yeah, she is not at fault. And that's important for us to realize in this culture. The fact that he forced her is defending her innocence. That means she was not consenting.
Right.
And that means that she is not at fault.
Right.
And the text points that out. This is not a mark on Dinah's character. This is entirely a mark on Shechem's character.
Yeah.
Now, I was looking for the list because I always forget all the details of the 12 children, but because Dinah is Leah's daughter, we're going to expect the strongest response to come from Leah's children.
Mm.
Right? And who's the oldest of Leah's children?
Reuben.
Reuben.
Right.
So if I were just reading this and I didn't know what was going to happen, I would expect Reuben to be the first responder here.
Right.
He won't be. But you know who I would not expect to respond?
Is
Joseph.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But all these kids are Leah's. What I was trying to find is if Dinah was, I'm sorry, I was trying to remember which of Leah's sons were technically born of the maidservant. That's what I was trying to remember. Because I'm guessing it's going to be her sons that are most upset.
That'd be interesting to look at. I know you.
Yeah,
had
I tried to
last
look it
time.
up. I just can't remember. I'm pretty sure that Reuben, Levi, Simeon, and Judah are all Leah and Jacob's children. I think it's Naphtali, Issachar, who are from Bilhah, but I'm doing that from memory.
Dan and Gad.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them.
I wish I had that right in front of me too. That would be helpful. But maybe I can find that real.
Well, I'll look it up while we're talking.
Chart. Okay. It is interesting though how much the text really, while you're looking that up, while the text really wants to show the passion of Shechem for Dinah. it seems to want to really emphasize that.
Yeah,
That
it's
he
Dan.
longed
Dan and Naphtali
are
are born from Bilhah,
Bilhah. Okay.
and then Zilpah, who is Rachel's maidservant, gives birth to Gad and Asher.
All right. So the boys that go after them are
They're all
are
Leah's children.
on D. Yeah, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. We're still gonna wonder why Reuben didn't, but anyway.
Yeah, I think he was busy with other things.
Yeah, we find out later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does reflect that Jacob doesn't seem to have a real good handle over his boys,
Right.
and that
Nor his wives. I mean, Jacob is pretty placid in this relationship. Remember, we commented on that a few weeks ago with the way the women seem to be deciding where he was going to be. He's, and we saw a little bit of that when he was young, like his mother kind of directed him and he followed her lead, and we saw him kind of get taken advantage of by Laban, and then he's sort of weak with his wives, and he lets this competition between them dictate his behaviors. And now we're in a similar situation where his sons are kind of taking the lead. So as much as I see some strong character traits in Jacob that I pointed out, this is a real problem.
Yeah. In his defense, I would just say I think maybe he's just overwhelmed,
Right,
and scared of the. I mean, it's no excuse. It's no excuse at all.
right.
But to maybe say in sympathetic words, I mean, the fear of the land. He just now got over the fact that his brother could have wiped him out and everything he had. And then even on the spiritual side of experiencing the wrestling with God, and being touched in his hip. I'm not making this defense for him. I'm saying,
well, you have to defend how difficult this return has been. I mean, God sent him to return, and the first thing that happens is Esau comes to meet him, and he looks like he has bad intentions. And then the next thing is God has an angel fight him. And now, as soon as he gets into the land, his daughter gets raped. I mean, he can't really think that God's with him, right?
Yeah. Well, it is a bit to manage with all that.
Yeah. Yeah. If this all happened to you, wouldn't you question whether it was really God who told you to leave Haran and come back? Or did God really give him this land? Things are going terribly. So you see Jacob let his sons fight for him, but you're right. He might be full of self-doubt at this point.
Yeah. And there was a book written when I was a teenager. I don't know who wrote it even now. I don't know. That's really important, but why bad things happen to good people. I don't remember the author or even one sentence out of that book, just that title. With the realization that this is in here for a real good reason. If not just out of the issue of fear,
right?
Fear and obedience, and then even after a high point of setting up an altar and saying and making another footprint of faith in the promised land.
Yep.
Or there's always seems to be that roller coaster ride.
Yeah, it reminds me of a scene from It's a Wonderful Life. I just thinking about that. It had been Christmas time not that long ago. And when George Bailey is praying and then this guy comes in and punches him and he gets a bloody lip. And then later, I can't remember the next scene, how it transitions, but I think he's talking to the angel. But anyway, he says to him, "What happened to your lip?" He said, "Oh, I got a punch in response to a prayer a little earlier." I feel like that's where poor Jacob is. But it's a reminder to us, right, that you can be following God's will and still have horrible things happen on the way.
Yeah. And in reality, I mean, there are plenty of opportunities. I think you've been in ministry. I've been in ministry for a lot of times, and you sometimes question what, it's not nearly this bad. Nobody wants this. This is like the Shaq kind of storyline. Nobody really wants to have this happen to them. but yet in some ways, there are stories in ministry that we face that, or people have faced, and you ask yourself, how in the world did they ever get through that?
Yeah.
And
we see mistakes were made here at the beginning. If she had been accompanied by one of her brothers, if Jacob had learned the fear lessons of his grandfather and his father, it might have been averted. But here we are. So the big question, right, is how do you respond? What do you do now that this has happened?
Or they even begs the question of any kind of discussion, like the family remembering that so much. We were talking so much about the Sabbath, or remembering things about what God is teaching us. The concept of a family even talking about, okay, we are entering into this land, we're entering into this ministry, we are entering into this area, what God is asking us to do, and actually talking about the some of the things that are important about why we're going here, what we're doing, because it does seem like she went on her own accord and did her own thing, and she may have been forcing some things to happen and hoping for something different, or maybe rebelling about it with her parents, or had a big argument. But the issue, what I'm getting at is often silence is the motivator sometimes, that people do things because they just didn't talk about it, maybe. Or
I agree with you. This is a reminder to share those difficult. I remember it's become kind of more common knowledge, because a lot of folks have been willing to share their stories, how minority communities have to teach their children how to respond to police officers, because they're at real risk when they're encountering police officers, that if they don't respond in the right way, they can be disproportionately hurt. Funny enough, I grew up in a lower class town. It's not anymore. It's really financially improved since I was a kid. But when I was a kid, it was somewhat depressed. My father actually did teach me how to interact with police officers and what to do if I got pulled over. Mm-hmm. And I remember, the conversations of be respectful and always say sir, and don't make any sudden movements, and keep your hands on the wheel and wait for them to ask for what they want, and then show them. I was taught that as a child, because the police officers, again, we were slightly lower class. I'm sure there was a lot more crime. And so they, when you're in an atmosphere like that, the police officers are very highly charged because they don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so my father did teach me how to interact. And I can remember the first time I got pulled over and remembering my father's words and doing all those things. Mm-hmm. But maybe some families don't talk about this. Maybe they just clearly, well, we already saw that Isaac and Jacob's relationship was not very good. So probably the odds of him passing down good wisdom about how to live in this land probably weren't very good anyway. But you're bringing up an important thing. The knowledge, not just about the good to do, but how to be safe in dangerous environments, is something parents have to talk about.
Yeah. And then on top of that too, is like, even the discussion, the negotiation of husband and wife, even depending on what age she was, even though they were married earlier, there doesn't seem to be a lot of investment there either. But it's extra. That's kind of I'm just adding to that, saying that she's Leah's daughter. Maybe there was priority.
Yeah.
And or timing. So many times, like I think of the passage where Jesus says that some are forcibly making the kingdom come.
Yeah.
And I think.
And when you have this many children in this large of a household, people do slip through the cracks, which might have happened to Dinah. My grandmother was one of 19 kids. She told the story of driving to church one day. I don't think they had all 19 at that point. She was the third oldest, so she was there from almost the beginning. And she said they would drive in this little vehicle to go to Mass. They were Catholic. And she said they would stack the children, like the oldest ones on the bottom, and then they would move up. And I don't, we always had this picture of like a clown car, But one day on the way to church, she fell out of the car. And she was on the bottom, and they didn't notice right away. and of course there's so many kids, how did they notice? But eventually they noticed, because we said, my father said to her, did anybody ever see you, or did you have to walk to church? She said, no, they must have realized it because they came back to get me after a while. But you wonder too, this is such an enormous family. It's like that, right? This is such a big family. They got 12 boys and who knows how many daughters. It's also possible that Dinah could have slipped out. But the way that the story is being told, I just feel something malicious.
Yeah.
Could be wrong though.
Yeah, it's we don't want to blame the victim too much.
No, the text goes out of its way not to put any blame on Dinah.
Yeah.
For this culture.
But we do question what in the world she was thinking.
Why she was there by herself, and why there wasn't more family involvement, and why they weren't taught concern in a culture that we've already seen concern in 2 generations of this family. All of that bothers us. But let's look at their response.
Yep.
So the sons of Jacob were told, answered deceitfully. We didn't read what, with everybody what they are going to do, but we'll just talk through it. So they tell them something that's true. Abraham, all the males in Abraham's household have to be circumcised. They're not allowed to marry outside of that. That's in Genesis chapter 17. So they're not wrong, but they have no intention of giving their daughters to these men. That's the deceit. But they are telling the truth. And that's the interesting, deceit works best, it seems, in these stories when it's partially true. That's how Satan got Adam and Eve too. And so here they're embodying the half-truth. We can't marry your sons unless you're circumcised, right? So if you want this to happen, you're going to have to get circumcised. And they leave them with the impression, yeah, you can marry our daughters as long as you do this, but they have malicious intent, right? Are you surprised at how quickly Shechem and his father agree to this, and then all the men agree to it too? I mean, this is a pretty serious procedure.
Yeah, I totally feel like they have no idea what they're getting into.
Well, Jacob is fabulously wealthy, right?
Yeah, it seems like it. I mean, he's able to buy land as soon as he gets there.
This is after he gave away all that good stuff to Esau too.
They're definitely impressed. And
Shechem persuades the rest of the men of his settlement to do it because of the greed, right? I mean, look at all this that guy has. If we marry into this, it's all going to be ours.
Well, he's the father of the prince, so there must have been some power of persuasion there.
Sure.
But I just have a hard time. I don't even know how you could have that conversation with somebody
Yeah, we live in a totally different world.
Yeah,
but remember, wealth in our culture is something that you earn, and it's not so communally acquired. In this culture, if you could get wealth through marriage, that was the way to do it, because it's hard to earn this kind of wealth. We know that Jacob has it because God blessed him. But the only way that many of these guys probably think they can get that wealth is to marry into it.
Yeah, or they saw it as a real sweetheart deal.
Yeah. Yeah, but they agree to it awful quick. And of course, they're going to be incapacitated because this is a pretty serious thing and it's going to take a while to heal. And, these are adults.
Yeah, we're still talking flint knives and
right. Yeah, this, who knows? I mean, if they're from the Hittites, they might have a little more access to better weapons. I mean, there certainly were pretty good metallurgy known in the ancient world at this time, just not by the Israelites. So they might have had some decent, but it's not going to be surgical steel like we have. Right. You know what I mean? But they're not. Sharp. We're not talking here about necessarily stones either.
Yeah, not necessarily sharp either.
Yeah, not sharp like a surgical thing. Yeah. So the whole plot here is that while these guys are recovering from this very intimate surgery, they'll come in and kill them all. That's the intention, right?
So would you go out on a limb there and say that you think they did this to themselves?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they know how. I mean, circumcision is well known in the ancient world. Just not everybody did it. And it's 2 sons of Jacob who go in and do the deed. Now, it doesn't mean that it was their plan, because remember, it says all the sons of Jacob spoke deceitfully.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my thing with Reuben. It might have been Reuben who sent these two guys in. He's the elder brother. We don't know why they got singled out.
Mm-hmm.
But Simeon and Levi are the ones who go in and kill all the males of this city while they're incapacitated.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the second two sons. So Reuben's the oldest, and then you have Simeon and Levi. I can't remember which one of the two of them is older than the other. I think it goes Simeon, then Levi, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah. And then after them is Judah.
Mm-hmm.
He's the fourth born. I mean, we can only speculate. Why do you think these two guys went in?
Well, we thought we've already surmised that Reuben was busy, but I think I think that that there's this ability, I think, of older ones to rally or shame. I think of Duck Dynasty a little bit or something like that with this kind of thing, but that's probably not real helpful. It's just an image that I had where they kind of bicker at each other and challenge each other, and but I tend to think that it wouldn't be all that hard to say, hey, this is your sister, this is our sister. Aren't you going to do something about this? Because you can't just have anybody just come and taking our women,
right?
And
it's the same thing Absalom does when the same thing happens in David's household. Yeah. So Simeon and Levi go in and they kill all the men in the city. And we say city, it's not like the city of New York, right? These are ancient cities, encampments. So it's probably not hundreds of thousands of people or anything like that, but still a sizable slaughter. And then the other sons of Jacob follow after them and plunder the city.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what happens. Makes me think it was planned. I would imagine Simeon and Levi were for some reason sent in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what singled them out, but we'll talk about the ramifications of this through the history of Israel later. Mm-hmm. And then they go in and they take everything. This is verse 28. They take everything. It says they take their flocks, their herds, their donkeys, whatever was in the city, whatever was in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones, all their children, and their wives. All that was in their houses they captured and made their prey.
Mm.
So this is what the sons of Jacob do.
Yeah.
They do to the entire city what Shechem did to their daughter, to their sister.
Oh. That's in the self-defense class, or the gun permit class is what they call unequal retaliation.
Right. Yeah, this is definitely not. It maybe it's maybe in the ancient Near East at this time it would be considered reasonable, but it's certainly not the law of Moses reasonable, where it's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Yeah. This is excessive by that, and it makes Jacob upset. And he doesn't get upset with all of his sons. He singles out Simeon and Levi. Right? He says in verse 30, "You've brought trouble on me by making me odious to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I'll be destroyed, both I and my household." And they say, "Should our sister be treated like a," and I'll edit the New Revised Standard Version, "like a prostitute?"
Mm-hmm.
And then God speaks to Jacob and says, "Get out of here." Well, that'll be next time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the brothers make it all about justice. Jacob's reservation is about the balance of powers with the people there.
Right.
And
they just took out an entire town and they looted it. That's going to look to everybody in the land like they're conquerors.
Mm-hmm.
And Jacob already knows what happens, right? I mean, but maybe he does. I mean, Abraham certainly saw what happened when cities aligned against each other and went to war, because Abraham and Lot were caught up in that mess.
Yeah.
And so Yeah, Jacob is worried about the political fallout, which might explain his lack of response.
Yeah.
But the kids, they're more consumed with what's right, at least in their eyes, what's right in their eyes. And God is nowhere in this story. He doesn't speak to Jacob. He doesn't speak to the sons. They're just doing their own thing.
Right.
Yeah. It's Jacob has a point. We're going to have to say that he has a point, but boy, his household has now been enlarged through a terrible, terrible violence.
Yeah, you'd think that, they take everything and they emphasize the little ones and the wives.
Yeah.
And that to some degree,
they probably became slaves or servants in Jacob's house, probably.
and some people would probably think that that's being merciful. But what kid's going to be normal after seeing that happen to their dad?
I know. It's a terrible scene, and it's presented as a terrible scene. Jacob is not pleased with it, and there's fallout throughout Israel, the history of Israel, which we should recognize. So Jacob will not forget this scene. And later, when he blesses his sons, he will deliberately pass over Simeon and Levi for their birthright because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And in the future of Israel, we should remember this. God remembers this scene too. These are the only two tribes that don't receive a tribal inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
Simeon and Levi don't get their own tribes. Simeon gets a bunch of cities within the tribe of Judah. So he has a cluster of cities within the tribe of Judah, but he doesn't get his own allotment. And Levi, of course, becomes the priests. And so they have no allotment in Israel. They serve at the temple. And some people might think, well, that's a high honor. I guess it is, but they have no inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
So this event changes the course of history for Simeon and Levi. It affects their descendants for all the rest of the generations of Israel.
Yeah.
So it has a lingering effect.
And yet they think they were justified in doing what they did.
They do. And it's funny, Simeon, not so much. Though Simeon does come back into the story in interesting ways. He's the one that they leave behind in Egypt. Do you remember when they go to see Joseph and they have to leave somebody behind as a prisoner in Egypt because Joseph won't let them go back unless someone's left behind? That's going to be Simeon. So they do become lesser sons here after this event. So Simeon gets left behind. So he comes in there, but he doesn't get a lot of other stories other than he gets a few cities in Judah's inheritance. But Levi is going to be in this position later. So you might remember we read this in Exodus together when we were reading through that when the people sinned with the golden calf, it's the Levites who go through and kill people in the camp. It's funny how they're left to this. Violence in the name of God becomes a part of the themes of the people of Levi, at least in the Torah. And you might even say later on too.
So I have a question for you. Throw out a curveball here. The last word that you muted. What is the Hebrew connotation with that word?
Like prostitute.
It's prostitute.
Harlot.
Okay.
Yeah, the word is zonah.
So what does that imply about what they're saying to Jacob? Would it be that they're saying that your reaction to this makes us feel like you wanted her to be this type of person?
Yeah, it sounds to me, my guess, this is a guess, is that Jacob was part of the negotiation with his sons, even though they were leading it. And Jacob left that conversation thinking that this marriage was going to happen. And the sons reneged on the covenant, which is what bothers Jacob. And then they take the city. But they're accusing Jacob, if they didn't do what they did, if they let them marry, that he's basically used his daughter as a way to curry favor with the people. He's made her a prostitute.
Yeah.
And
does that has different connotations to us than it does?
Yeah, well, the verb that this comes from, zanah, it means to have sex outside of marriage. So it can be fornication, just sex outside of marriage, but it's also the word used for harlot, and I think it's translated right. I think prostitute is the right implication, that she's been used as a currency. And they're accusing Jacob of doing that. And Jacob almost admits that that was what was in his heart, because he indicates he didn't want to react against the Shechemites because he didn't want to become a stench in the nostrils of the people of the land. So I think Jacob confirms that he thought of Dinah as a sacrificial lamb here. And for Levi and Simeon, that is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And that carries on in Levi's line. That's my point. The Levites have a high sense of justice. You're going to see it. Not just in Exodus, where you do see it, but also in Judges. It's going to be a Levite that rallies all the tribes of Israel to come and wipe out the tribe of Benjamin.
After the
rape of his concubine.
Yeah.
So this becomes this theme of Levi.
Cuts it into 12 pieces.
Yeah.
Sends it.
Another terrible story.
So the question I have then is why do people feel, a lot of people feel like this is justice to Shechem in his how do we interpret that correctly to be able to help people to understand
there's something just about it, right? But then something very unjust. So first, the reaction is disproportionate. They do much worse to the Shechemites than the Shechemites did to them. Not that, it's hard to evaluate sins, but in sheer tonnage, in sheer gross tonnage, they did more damage to the Shechemites than the Shechemites did to them. And so you have to say that it's disproportionate at the very least. Now, should there have been a consequence for what Shechem did to Dinah? And the answer is yes. And in the law of Moses, his life would have been forfeit for what he did, especially if she protested, which we're told she did. Now, if she didn't protest, they would have had to be married. That's in the law of Moses. But since she protested, the text tells us he had to force her. His life would have been forfeited. So there would have been a consequence, but certainly not even in the law of Moses should the entire city have been killed. So it's not that it's not just to do something. Something deserved to be done, but what was done was not justice.
And Jacob didn't even weigh in, pretty much.
No, Jacob, he's silent. The only thing we hear from him makes it sound like his silence was a type of diplomacy. It was a diplomatic decision on his part to let this stand, even though clearly if his kids knew it was wrong, they would have learned that from their dad. I mean, so clearly he knew it was wrong, but he apparently thinks that not responding is better than responding.
Yeah, because people will use this kind of text to justify their
we can't do that because the law of Moses later will condemn this behavior. The death of Shechem might have been justified in these days, but not the death of the entire city. So it's a tough story. And today the consequence for rape is prison. That's the consequence. But even we would recognize that the consequence shouldn't be the entire wiping out of the person's entire family line. So, but there should be justice done. And I'm somewhat frustrated with Jacob that he was more concerned for his safety than for what was right. And I think his lack of leadership here allows his sons to go so overboard that they do something worse than the Shechemites did.
Right.
And I think that's on Jacob. That's how I want to read it. I think it's on Jacob.
And it's so easy. We talked earlier about a little bit off video, a little bit about the capital attacks and stuff like that, and how people sometimes can go further than ever intended by any leader Martin Luther King, we talked about
Yeah.
a little bit. People will always try to one up or one step others.
Yeah.
And
This is the thing, right? When justice is left undone, people will take it into their own hands. And that's what happened here. Jacob did not do anything to try and make sure the right outcome was done with his daughter. And because he refused to do it, his sons took it into their own hand. And you can't, like you're saying, you can't control how people are going to take these things. And it's happening in our culture here too. You know, when leaders are quiet, or let's say even saying things that are injurious to justice, I hold Jacob responsible for his son's overreaction because he did not lead.
Yeah.
And, you know, when leaders don't lead, things get out of control.
Right. And it comes back on him.
It does. I mean, Jacob pays the price. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
he does have trouble in this land. And the next thing God's going to say to him is, you got to leave here. And he goes further south to Bethel. You know, this does cause problems for him. And of course, this lays a foundation of future violence in his own household.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you might say that the brothers' hate for Joseph is as much about their hate for Jacob as it is for, you know, his favoritism.
Yeah.
You know,
So maybe a person could make an argument to say that this is kind of a carry on of, or maybe a reaction or a boomerang action from the actual type of relationship that Isaac maybe was experiencing with Jacob himself. That there might have been, I mean,
Yeah.
oftentimes there's those similarities that, you know, I mean, we accused, or maybe there was an accusation made potentially that Isaac really had some difficult times.
Yeah.
Interacting with Jacob, interacting with Abraham. Maybe there's this idea of dysfunction is what I'm really
it's
what it's
being
saying.
passed down. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And, you know, Jacob is not a great father, but he didn't have a great father either.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's interesting how that passes down. You might say that what the brothers eventually do to Joseph was as much to hurt Jacob as it was to get rid of Joseph. And I think that's kind of played out here. There's obviously friction. Obviously, the sons of Leah suspect that they're being treated unfairly. And their daughter and their sister Dinah is an example of how their family, Leah's family, is second class in this house. And that's going to really shine itself when it comes to the Joseph dynamic. And it's interesting how that will change. Like after they see what happens when Joseph is gone, they see their father differently, and they don't want to see him hurt like that again. But at this point, I think this is the beginning of strife between Jacob's sons of Leah and himself. And the very next thing that happens with Reuben seals the deal. I mean, obviously they have no respect for their father at all. Yeah, so these family dynamics are crazy. And you pointed it out at the beginning, and we should reiterate it here at the end. There's a lot of not talking going on here. There's not a lot of communication between Jacob and his sons, not a lot between, you know, with Dinah and warning her and preparing her for a dangerous world. There's just not a lot of that going on, and it's really paying dividends. It's no wonder that in the law of Moses, the first thing that God tells them after he gives them the law is, you have to teach this to your children. That's something the patriarchs were not very good at.
Well, not only the patriarchs, but I think many people today struggle with telling the story. They either don't believe it or they don't appreciate it. I mean, many of people, I'm sure, would rather skip over this chapter.
Oh, sure. But there are lessons for us too, because this could have been avoided with some wisdom. And I can remember, you know, one of the risks to young kids today is this human trafficking thing that goes on in our country. It affects people right here in the United States. And so I remember we had a couple at a previous church that had a real heart for that ministry. And they really wanted to inform parents on the way that social media was being used to lure kids into very dangerous situations and things like that. So they wanted to do a presentation in the church. So I allowed it. I told them it had to be PG. It couldn't be too graphic. And they did a presentation, did a wonderful job. Very informative. I thought it teased parents enough that they could get more information if they wanted to. I thought it went really well. But I was accosted by one of the families of kids at just the age that he was trying to help them understand they were at risk. And they were furious. They thought they should have had advance notice that this was being happening because they did not want their kids exposed to this kind of information. And I thought, well, that's just foolish. I mean, that's like what happened to Dinah. You don't send people into Shechem in a place that you know they shouldn't be alone and let them figure it out the hard way. You got to train your kids. And that's one story here that we can gain. And I said to them, I'm sorry, you're right. It's sensitive material. I guess we should have announced in advance of this week that it was going to happen. But I worked hard to make sure that the presenters knew it had to be PG and family friendly. Yeah. But they were totally against even the subject matter being discussed. And that's, in my view, just foolish.
Yeah.
Our kids are at risk. Dinah was at risk here. And they should have known better. The story of Genesis tells us they should have known better. Yeah.
Yeah. And even things like I mentioned, the book of the shack or the movie or whatever you want to call it. There's that issue that sometimes you can be the best parent in the world and still bad things happen.
Oh yeah. There's no guarantee. Yeah. But we do have to prepare our children for realistic eventualities.
Right.
And we don't see a lot of communication here.
Right.
There's not a lot of parenting going on. And the selfishness of these parents is obvious. Leah and Rachel have spent most of their lives trying to get Jacob's affection, and their kids have just been pawns in this game. And Jacob has spent his life slaving away at Laban and just basically spending all of his time working. And so the impression of the text is these kids have mostly raised themselves. And we can't be very impressed with how that's worked out.
Right. Right. It's kind of a funny, not a funny, but interesting contrast between the sons of Ishmael and the sons of Jacob.
Yeah.
This idea that they would be in contention with each other. And I mean, that's what it said about Ishmael and his descendants. There seems to be a lot of commonality here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, Ishmael was going to be at war with his brothers, right? That was what God said about him. He was a donkey of a man, but it seems like Jacob's kids are about the same. But things are going to change. The Lord is going to get a hold of them in some interesting ways. And unfortunately, there's even more sin to come before the real restoration of this family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any final words, Minister Joe?
Oh, there is hope. Just know that I told my wife this morning when we talked, I says, there's some things in the Bible that are hard to talk about, that are dysfunctional, that are painful, but to ignore them and just say, oh, we're gonna sift that out of there. Let's not talk about that. There are some important things to learn from these texts. To just ignore them or just say that we just need to read the New Testament. There are lots of things that we can learn here about family dynamics, about how we can appreciate each other, how to respect life, and mostly what justice is, how often we can be offended by our neighbor or others, and be tempted to retaliate with in a way that's just not right.
Yeah, that's disproportionate.
And so it's vital for us to understand these stories, that this isn't justice. This is way beyond.
And parents can start to teach their kids these things, even in the small ways, like in the innocent things, like pranks. Now, I remember doing youth ministry, and when you do youth ministry at a camp, and you worked at a camp a long time, minister, you know how quickly pranks get out of hand, right? First of all, strong people tend to pick on weak people, and that's abominable to begin with. But they also escalate, and they escalate fast. You know, and I told the kids when I did youth ministry that we wouldn't tolerate any pranks, and we told them exactly what the response would be to each prank, so that we could set a good example of making sure that our response was not disproportionate, that it was warned in advance, that they knew what would happen, and that we carried it out. But I'm telling you, you let pranks go, and it goes haywire quickly. One kid will get his hand put in warm water, and the next thing you know, some other kid's entire wardrobe is in the lake. You know, I mean, and because people tend to escalate, they tend to think that the way to overcome evil is to scare people, to make people think you never want to do this to me again. And that's how things escalate, because you're trying to motivate people to not bother you by making them afraid of you. And so it's never about justice, it's about intimidation. And I think in the end, that's probably what's behind Simeon. They're more or less saying, we want everybody in this land to know that they can't mess with us. And that's why they have such a disproportionate response. It's not about justice. It's put in the words of justice, but it's really about fear. And you can start teaching your kids when they're young that they can't feed that, you know? And
crouching at the door, right?
Yeah, it's always crouching at the door. And God says, right, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth in the law of Moses, the more or less saying you cannot overreact. Like justice requires that a fair punishment for a crime. That's what he's trying to say to them. Now, Jesus will say later, you heard it said an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. I tell you, you should love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So Jesus is even saying justice requires fair punishment, but you know, you can be godly without punishing people at all. If you can imagine it. You can imagine you could even do good to people who do bad to you. Can you imagine that? Because most people are like, no. I'm just trying to figure out how much punishment I can get away with. You know, so Jesus even ups the ante. You know, that true justice is full of mercy. But at least in the law of Moses, he says it has to at least be equal. I mean, these guys, they're trying to set a standard. You know, they're trying to say, this is what happens when you mess with the sons of Jacob. And Jacob is at least here wiser than his sons. He's like, you don't want that. Like, if these guys join forces, we're dead. Like, you don't want, you're being stupid. Like, you can't burn an entire village. You know, there are 15 cities over here. Like, these guys are going to come and take us out. So at least Jacob helps them there. It's the only good thing from Jacob in the whole story. Yeah,
especially when you take their kids, kill the men, take their kids and everything they own. That word gets around that doesn't.
It gives God a bad name. It gives the Israelites a bad name. It's terrible. It's terrible. Yeah. You can teach your kids, though, to avoid this young by not letting them escalate retaliations. If they're picked on at school, don't send them to go, break the kid's arm.
Oh yeah. Or we've heard so many.
Or sue the parents for everything they have.
Right.
Or however else people go and burn a city in retaliation for harm done. This gets out of hand quick. Don't be Simeon and Levi.
That's right. Learn it from the text.
Yeah. But there is justice does need to be done. Dinah did need to be, first she had to be warned in advance. She should have been protected when she went, and what happened to her should have been addressed.
Yeah.
It just wasn't addressed correctly. Yeah.
At the very simple, just go get her and bring her home.
Yeah, absolutely. Get her out of that house. They left her there. You were right when you said that, because when they go in and kill all the males, that's when they take her home.
Yeah. It's just.
Yeah. What a terrible story. It's not a good start. Here we are back in the land, supposed to be a blessing to all nations, and this is horrible.
And they just set up an altar saying this is the place for God, the God of gods.
Yeah, this is another one of the 10 Commandments. Do not carry the Lord's name in vain. Don't blaspheme him. Well, they blasphemed him here.
Mm.
because they do this in his name. They are the children of Israel.
This is just a thought that just came to my mind right there. But you think that was foolish of Jacob to do that there? Do you think that originally he should have like we said, we foreshadowed for the next chapter, that Bethel should have been the place where he set up that altar?
I don't understand. It does strike me as brazen. But he buys the land. So maybe he thought, I'm buying it. But it is brazen. This is far north of where Isaac had settled in Beersheba.
Yeah.
I think it's brazen, but he does it legally. He buys the land.
Mm.
But still, I don't know why he decided to do that. The text is silent on it. It doesn't go well.
I know we're pretty much at the end of the video, but could it be like the teens have said recently, that when you pull out the iPhone 12, that Jacob was flexing his wealth, flexing like in front of these people, saying, "Look how great I am! I've come into this land, and I bought this, and here's the God, my God, right here in your face," kind of thing. Could that be an underlying?
I think it's very possible myself. I couldn't argue against it. I mean, he definitely purchases land in a highly populated area, and they are well aware of his wealth.
Yeah.
Like that, what the warning Jacob gives to his sons, we don't want to make ourselves a stench to the people in the lands. He sort of set the precedent. You may be right. This may be a little, hey, I'm back, and he's putting his stake down pretty far north. If that's the case, if we read it that way, then Jacob's getting a lesson in humility as well.
Yeah. I mean, his brother's got the other side of the Jordan, as Seir, right? Southern Seir. So maybe that was too close for his comfort to be near his brother, even though his brother was.
It's true. Maybe he didn't want to go back down to Beersheba because it was so close to where his brother was.
Yeah.
There's so many family dynamics in this story, and people making decisions that end up going poorly. I think in the end, what we're learning here, this would be my summary, is that these rifts between family members, they don't go away. And the rift between Jacob and Esau is not going away. It's causing even Jacob to make some foolish decisions. And you've got to, and then the rift between Rachel and Leah, and the way that Jacob is favoring Rachel's children and treating Leah's children as commodities, which already happened with Esau, and now it's kind of happened again. It's leading these kids to take matters into their own hands. Like, this stuff doesn't go away. You can't just ignore these things and think that people will just forget it and we'll move on. Like, if we're learning anything, it's that these issues have to be resolved.
Yeah. Can you imagine being in the room there trying to guide some family therapy there?
I would definitely refer the family of Jacob to a specialist.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Huh?
Oh, yeah, this is more than most of us could handle. There's so many things, and it goes back several generations. Because whatever happened between Abraham and Isaac on Mount Moriah spills over into Isaac's relationship with God, and seems to have an effect on the way he raises his own children and which of them he prefers.
Mm-hmm.
And then that spills over into Jacob and how he's raising his own children. It's difficult. I think it's not until Jacob's family is forced to have some very difficult conversations through what happens to Joseph, and then the famine, and then the interactions in Egypt. They're forced to come clean with each other. We finally see some healing.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's any lesson for our families today, these things aren't going away. You can ignore them, but they have their way of coming out.
It's totally. I mean, to even really extrapolate, I mean, you're referring to Genesis 50, right? With what Joseph says about the situation.
Yeah, and the fact that the brothers have to admit that Joseph wasn't killed, that they sold him into slavery, and Jacob has to hear that truth, and Jacob has to then bless all of his sons and be honest with each of them about how he feels about them, which is what happens at the end of the book. Once all of that happens, they become a family, and all 12 of them inherit the birthright. But it takes some pretty severe stuff before these people are honest with each other. It doesn't happen until Joseph. Yeah. Yep. So for our families, it's not going away, guys. Right. You can ignore these rifts in the home, but it's not going away.
Yeah. Did I ever tell you the story about my kids and the bicycle for Michaela?
No. Do you have permission to share this story?
Probably. I just found out recently that my older kids used to make my daughter, youngest daughter, upset because they teased her about a bicycle that she got. They thought that the bike was brand new and that she was the only one that ever got a brand new bicycle. But in reality, I told my youngest daughter that we had bought it at all those years they were teasing her. Come to find out, the bicycle was bought, but it was bought from a thrift shop, and that I just thought that was funny that they would tease her, and she never said anything to us about it or to me about it. And when the truth came out, she was like, "Oh, they teased me all that time." So it's those times of families where people will actually think something and it's wrong.
Yeah, you have to dispel these rumors. You can't leave it, especially in families, you can't leave things open to interpretation. You have to be clear. And we don't always know that. Like, we don't even know how people are misinterpreting things. Yeah. Like in my own family, I was older than my brother. So by the time my brother has any memories, I was not being disciplined by my parents very much. But he didn't know. I mean, I remember being disciplined, though my parents sometimes deny it nowadays. Mom, we never disciplined you. You were a perfect kid. And I'm like, well, I remember differently, when I was a kid. But my brother didn't see that because he's 5 years younger than me. So by the time he has any memories, I was older and not being disciplined for the silly things that he was being disciplined for because he was 5 years younger. So in his memory, I was never punished. And my sister has the same memory. Well, I know that that's not true, but they don't know it. And when I share some of the things that happened to me as a kid, my brother thinks I'm lying. Like, no, that never happened to you. You were always a good kid. And I was like, well, I did care what my parents thought. That's a big difference between my brother and myself. I did care. But I got into trouble. Like I remember, I had a confrontation with my dad because he wouldn't let me go see this one movie. And I thought he was crazy. It was all based on ratings for him, but I had done the research and all that stuff, and I thought he was crazy. So, but I told him, okay, fine, we won't go see it. And then I went and saw it. And I remember a friend of his who was my family doctor went to the same movie. And he saw me there. And he loved the movie. It was a funny moment because he's saying, wasn't that a great movie? It was Last of the Mohicans.
No.
And he said, wasn't that a great movie? And I said, yeah, I really enjoyed it. And here I am freaking out going, my father's going to know what I did. So I went home and told my father, but I only told him because I had gotten caught and he knew that. But I did do things like that. I do remember those moments and they were character forming for me. I'll never forget my father's response, which helped me for the rest of my life. He more or less said, I don't expect you to agree with me, but I do expect you to listen to me. Mm. And I felt really broken after that because I thought up to then that obedience was about agreement. Mm. And he helped me think about it differently. Yeah. And I could see that I really let him down and it really bothered me. So it was a good learning moment for me, but my brother thinks I never did anything like that, because he didn't see it. So it's funny how these stories kind of, they percolate and they take a life of their own in families. And it's the role of the parent to set things straight. And once you realized in your story, once you realized the truth, you told it. once you
Yeah.
realize where the misinterpretation was.
Yeah.
I'd like to see
Yeah.
Jacob do that more often.
Yeah. Well, if anything, it spurs us on to do it.
And these things don't
Right.
go away. I've said
Yeah.
it, this is my third time.
Yeah.
These rifts don't go away. I say to couples when I do counseling that the rift between two people is generally not filled with the things they have said. It's usually filled with the things they haven't said.
Yeah.
And a lot of fights are about things nobody wants to talk about.
Mm.
So oftentimes you have to start digging through that. And it's risky to do, because if you've let that little pit fill up enough, you do risk the end of your marriage by dealing with it, and permanent rifts in your family. But if you don't deal with it, the rift is going to happen anyway. It's just going to be slower.
Yeah.
So the best advice is be honest and talk about those hard things when they occur, and learn how to resolve them at the time they're happening. That's the best way. But if you haven't done that, don't think that it's going to go away.
Yeah.
Things come up, so we're learning that in these stories, that these families need to learn how to communicate with each other.
Yeah. Not only that, but the brothers took it pretty personal.
Yeah.
Really personal.
And maybe more personally than they would have had to if they thought their father cared about the children of Leah, which I think they suspect he doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's Jacob's fault.
Yeah.
So they probably take it even more personally than they might have.
Yeah. So parents, careful on the favoritism, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Careful.
As kids get older, personalities don't always get, so it's easy for parents to resonate more with one or two of their children than the others. You just find it easier to interact with them. Like, that's normal. Personalities are different, but it's really important that we don't lean into that.
Yeah.
That we don't make the relationship that's easy be the one that's primary.
Right.
Who knows? I mean, it's all different, but as parents, it's our responsibility to not let what's easy become all that we do. And for Jacob, it was easy to love Rachel's children because he so loved Rachel.
Yeah.
But it was wrong of him to make his other children feel that he didn't love them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's behind this story too, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Minister Joe. This was a tough one. But next week we'll get back, hopefully, to a little bit more less dark material. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks for listening.
God bless.